I get so inspired when I sit with people to have these conversations. I call it mindset transformation entertainment. I trademark that because it feels like if we entertain our mind, that all of a sudden our heart opens up, our creativity opens up, and then we get to see this world in a different way instead of just black and white and the to-do list. Because we're always going to have a to-do list, but what if you called it something else? What if you started seeing your day in a way of just being very creative, but you're still getting things done, but everything you do, it gives you lots of energy. And as a health coach, has been out there for about 25 years in the health industry. I think about, well, how much toll does it take on your body when you are thinking about this black and white, and I have to do this, but more of how can everything be all as one? And I believe that mindset transformation, entertainment, we entertain the mind, all of a sudden everything comes together. It just gets crystal clear. And I want to serve you in that way. I want to serve in the way of bringing experts like Kevin O'Connor. We're going to get into some really cool stuff. I find him that he's a connector. He's a person that really understands his genealogy and the preciousness around that. We're going to be talking about that. I get inspired when I see what he's doing because to me, when I'm with him, I feel really inspired. And so I want to invite you in to get to know Kevin. Welcome in Fresh Talks Global Vision. Welcome in Kevin O'Connor. Happy to have you here, my friend.
Hey, great introduction, great warm up. I think we call that a warm up, or
Hey, that's about the mindset transformation
yes,
entertainment.
yes. Well, thanks very much for having me here
Kevin, I'm so glad
and
I have
opening
you.
up your space to me. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here today, my friend. I've really enjoyed our talks. So, everybody, just so you know, that Kevin and I've had a couple times a chance to talk, and it's really fun to get to know people when they're really inspired. So, let me give you an intro to what he has here, and then we'll go into more details of how can your life expand if you start loving on whatever you have available for you and let all those other things go away, like the things that aren't working. And I want to get more deeper into what Kevin's talking about here, because when I look at his bio here, I really do see he's a connector, but he's even been a principal at school, and he's learning about all these things that that personally that he's dealing with, that he's actually helping other people. So let's get into his bio. Kevin O'Connor enjoys chronicling the stories of families and friends through tracing genealogical histories, writing, and picture collections. His prior writing includes personal letters, articles and professional publications, dissertations, anthologies, and presentations delivered at conferences, seminars, and webinars. He brings people together personally and professional, collaborating with friends and relatives. He plans family and class reunions. He sings and performs in theaters. He is active with the SMART, SMART Ride, a bicycling group that rides annually from Miami to Key West, raising funds for HIV awareness, treatment, and education. He was an elementary school principal, professor, and curriculum coordinator in California, Illinois, and Florida from 1973 to 2020. In his final educational positions, he authored content and provided training in areas including support for substitute teachers, LGBTQ advocacy, and sexual health, family life. He resides in Fort Lauderdale with his husband Leon. Their family includes 5 sons and 5 granddaughters. He references further connections to this book, and we'll give you the link here, but it is Kevin O'Connor author.com. And you'll be able to see how to spell his name, and it's author.com. Welcome in, Kevin. Let's get into this conversation. How are you?
All right,
How are you
thanks,
doing? How are you
Rhonda.
feeling about your intro? Your intros is so much fun. A lot of
Okay,
content.
thanks for the intro. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's just I'm glad I forget which bios I sent you. So that was an appropriate one. I keep a few on hand, so that summarizes pretty much where I'm at this point in my life. So, and it's actually um, we have 5 sons and 7 granddaughters. So, not that there's a recent birth, I guess I just, but yeah, and they range in age from 7 years to 24. So, the granddaughters.
what you're doing, it sounds like you do it through being inspired and being able to have, there's something else happening in my life. I'm out there supporting people. So you're connecting, but you're also living life forward. Like, this is what I'm experiencing. This is how I get to help people. And so you find ways to be able to do that in your community. And that what with that kind of inspiration, I really do find it to be inspiring because you're living through inspiration is what I feel when I'm the conversations we've had and what we're talking about in your bio. How's it feel to live like Kevin O'Connor? Is that an odd question to ask? I'm thinking
Hmm.
you live a little bit differently than most people. I've been interviewing for 8 years now, and there's just something different. I think that you know about yourself enough to kind of answer this. Like, what inspires you as Kevin O'Connor to be living this life, living all out, and being? I think it feels like you live pretty authentic when I'm getting to know you more.
Yeah, authentic. So word that's come much more into my vocabulary in the last 20 years since I came out. Or I don't, I think you and I talked about this. Sometimes I don't talk about coming out. I talk about is going to. I think sometimes in the LGBT world, we get attached to different vernaculars, and the common one is coming out of the closet or coming out of that. What I've reasoned in the last few years, well, since I came out, but I define it more as going to, because I felt like when I made that, I feel now in retrospect, when I made that move to come out and all that goes into coming out, it opened up a whole nother world to me.
Yeah.
So I think and I've had the opportunity to work with others who are in going through those steps in that process, whether it be an adult or whether it be students. When I was working in the educational field as an LGBT advocate and support person, that when whether it be a student or the parents themselves that were coming out, when I rephrased it to, well, what do you think you're going to? That put a different framework. It became less fearful, I think,
Yeah.
when myself and they were to say, well, this is what I'm hoping is going to happen. This is what I think is going to happen. This is what is happening. Then it becomes more of a going to process. And I talk about that in terms of in the LGBT world, but I think it's true, whether you're changing jobs, whether you're changing relationships, whether you're making a new friendship, um, whether you're exploring a new idea or new activity, there's really, it's a coming away and a going to. So back to one of the words you used in your intro, and we made reference the idea of connecting. I think that's really what when I think about what I've been up to. A theme that overrides a lot of things that I do. It's just the whole thing of connecting. When I when I meet somebody new or I've gotten acquainted with somebody, there's something in the back of my mind that says, "Hey, this person would be good to have this person know this person," or "I'd like to introduce them to so and so," or "I'd like to let them know about this activity." So I look at in my own relationships and in the things I encounter, I try to make connecting points. I try to and think of it. I don't try to. I do. I think of how do I make a connection for this activity, for this person, for this event. So
Yeah.
that's whether I'm working in theater or doing my writing or working in political circles or wherever I'm doing, I'm trying to and endeavoring to make connections. So that's part of what's an overriding theme of who I am right now at age 75. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I just listening to you speak right now, I think about you are here allowing people to have their human experience. I always think of like humanitarian kind of work. And when what we're talking about here is you're connecting, you're helping people just like where are you moving to? Like what's that forward feeling? And people easily can feel stuck. And it's easy to stay in that conversation and just keep having that conversation. But you really, I don't know if you thought about that, but you are living a life almost like you are living this humanitarian kind of project. Like no matter where you go, you're there finding, I guess maybe like a positive way to be reframing things to help people move forward. Just like even doing reunions, talking about your book, living in a 3-story house, and what was good about that. And can we go there? Has anybody ever asked you that? Can we just sit with that about what do you feel about if I say you've been kind of living a life like it's like a humanitarian project? Like, how can life get better for humans? I feel like you're on that crusade. Did you ever think about that?
Wow. Uh, that's an interesting angle. Put that in a different perspective.
Yeah.
When I was thinking of myself as humanitarian circles or things like that, you know, I'm thinking I was never in the Peace Corps, or I didn't. I don't. I mean, I make donations to things, but I don't go on missions and things like that.
But that
I'm
might be your definition of what you thought
Yeah.
before, but you were my friend, you are living, and I'll tell you, we're with this interview, we're gonna go deeper into that, to the stuff that you do, but have you thought about that? Because I know when I'm in your space, I feel like I need to know more about Kevin O'Connor. Like it's just that vibe. And it's like you're helping people without saying you're doing this wrong, you're doing that, whatever. You're just like you're looking forward and helping somebody see that vision, even through dancing and creativity and entertaining
Mhm,
people. It's about
mhm,
how can I get
mhm.
people to higher vibes. So in your definition, it could be with the general things, but you as a human being, you're helping people experience life in a different way, just naturally.
Yeah, and I have to when I listen to your comments. I mean, I have to think that most of my career, most of my life has been rooted in education. So teaching for and being a principal. So my education career spans from 1970, mid 70s to, well, still currently, but I mean, I retired in 2020. But one of the things I'm endeavoring to work on, I haven't started it yet, but is just to go back to former students and people that I used to work with, either in a classroom setting starting in 73,
Yeah.
1973, or when I was a principal,
Hmm.
to go back, and social networking provides for opportunities we didn't have before.
Yeah.
Contact those students that I used to work with, again, either as a teacher, as a principal, and just to connect with them and say, what is it that you remember from the experiences we did together? Um,
Cool.
and I pose that question to them because I'm thinking of a second grade teacher I had and the difference they made, or
Yeah.
the principal I had in elementary school, or the teacher in high school, more than many teachers. And and even though many of them are past and don't know the effect that they had on me, I'm wanting to find out, and I want to frame this study, this research I'm doing, for the benefit of other educators, because I want to, when I get to the point of doing the research and collecting information and then sharing articles and maybe a book, I wanted to say, hey, teachers, you don't realize it when you're wrapped up in the day-to-day stuff of everything you're doing. But 30 years after you have this student, they're going to remember something you did. They're going to
Yeah.
still have a connection.
Yeah.
And so, what uh, one of my next projects, I've always got a next project. One of my next projects is to go out and get that information and see, first of all, if these former students, if they remember, period, if they remember
They're like, who
me
are you,
or the
Kevin?
set. Yeah,
Who are you,
and that's
Kevin? I
going to
want.
happen.
Didn't I inspire you? No, I can't remember, Mr. O'Connor.
And that's okay. That's okay. No, I mean, I'll relate a story. I came across a former student's name on Facebook in the last 2 or 3 years ago, and she had a name that, when I saw the name, I thought this has to be the same person because it was
Yeah.
a one of a kind name. And and she turns out that she's an attorney in New York now. And when I wrote to her, and she was in my class, second grade class, 30 some years ago. And I said, hey, just want to run something by you. You know, what is it that you remember about our time together in second grade? And she said, what I remember the most is that you gave us time to play with puppets. Here I thought she'd be saying, hey, you taught me to read. I learned math from you. We learned about, whatever we were in the curriculum. But she remembered the playing with puppets and putting plays on. And I thought, well, that's interesting, maybe, and I haven't followed up with her, but maybe playing with puppets and using her voice, maybe part of that led to her being an attorney. Who knows, who
Yeah.
knows? But I was so, when she wrote that back to me, I thought, hey, that's how you made a difference. And I
Really.
think a lot of us in education, on any profession, don't avail ourselves of that time or that opportunity, or we don't see the people. We don't know what kind of impact we had. But, I know for myself, my fourth grade teacher helped me, gave me a project in which I got acquainted with the state of California, and years later ended up moving there and going to school there. It was probably that project in fourth grade that built a little fire in me.
Yeah.
So I'm rambling and going on and
No,
on.
I'm letting you go because I'm loving this because I think about this is in school, you have your curriculum, but there's all the peripheral things that are going on around there. And Mr. Ossett, he was my teacher 2 years in a row. And what I represent is something that he taught me. And it was that I need to feel safe. I felt scared every day. So when
Mm-hmm.
I went into his class, it was hard for me to connect, hard for me to really feel like I was part of it. Always felt on the exterior. My mind was kind of going at me even at that young age. And he just allowed me to feel safe.
Yeah, well,
And so
that's
I think about that as, my thing is I know I am on this humanitarian project. Actually, at 12 o'clock today, I put a board together and we're discussing, what this means. How could we, as a collaborative, collective coming together, how can we infuse this energy? And for me, on my side, I'm part of the board and putting this together is I want to stop the blaming and shaming out there. And I know that the more that we get entertained, like what you're doing, helping people move forward, that you see the bigger picture, you get inspired and you do big steps instead of being lost in the past stuff. All of a sudden, everything just starts opening up.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Kevin, can we go? You haven't brought this up except the beginning just for a moment.
Yeah.
Can we go in this space? Because I think our community would be really wonderful to talk about when you are feeling stuck and a situation that you had to deal with where you have learned how that was like a magical space, but one of the hardest spaces that you were in. Do you mind talking about when you're at the beginning and what the support you got about coming out or going
Mm-hmm,
to?
mm-hmm.
Can
Sure,
we
sure,
have
sure,
that
sure.
conversation about that?
Sure. And actually, I'll have to look back in some prior podcasts I've been on. But there's one of the podcast hosts, I think he titles his podcast Unstuck Moments, or how does, I think it's, if I said that, I don't want to say the name because I might pick a different one. But anyway,
Yeah.
that whole thing about how we go through life. And maybe when I was on his podcast, I spoke about something further in line with what you're asking. So what helped me get unstuck from that, because certainly I was stuck for many years, and when you talk to people that are LGBT, most of us will go back and say, "Well, we first knew when we were, a very young age, elementary years, middle school years. That's when we knew. We didn't know
Yeah.
what to call it, what to do with it. I think kids nowadays probably have more
Mhm.
vernacular. I didn't have that in the 1950s or 60s, so I just kept it inside for a long time, and availed myself of some different counseling things. But what really got me unstuck was in my fathering. I had two sons. And when my younger son was in his teens, I started to discover things on our household computers where he was trying to unpack his own identity.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, and I literally talked to his, we were married then. When I alerted his mom, I said, "Well, I'll talk to him." And but then when I was having the conversation, I really had to force my, not force, I really was confronted with being unstuck because here I'm having, from a father's point of view, trying to talk to my son about whether or not, or how does he identify when I myself in my mid 50s had put that, buried that so deep that I didn't really deal with it. So the initial part of my going to was talking to my son and saying, if I'm going to be authentic with him, I got to be authentic with myself.
Yeah.
And going through that process of what does that mean? And fortunately, at the time, I was seeing a counselor at the time, so I was able to unpack that with her and develop some steps, develop what to do. It was painful, leaving as I was helping him. I have to say, sometimes I say when I'm giving presentations about this or talking to people, I'll say, "Yeah, my son and I, we came out at the same time." So that was over. He was 16. He's now 41. So it's, we're talking some 25 years here.
Yeah.
Through that whole process, but that whole concept, framing it as you and I are right now in terms of stuck unstuck. I think recognizing that I was stuck and recognizing that I was holding myself back, but I was likely, and holding myself back, I wasn't being true to the others that I was living most closely with my spouse and my two kids and the people that I lived and worked with. So I had to confront that. Like I said, sometimes I talk about age 55. That's the year that if there's an official time, when I
Wow.
first started talking to people that were important to me in my life about who I was. And that evolved into a whole set of events.
Yeah.
I was going to start to call them consequences, but I don't mean to use the word consequence in a negative sense.
Yeah.
It's just follow-up events. Yeah, that resulted in making a decision about my relationship status. That resulted in what am I going to do in my profession.
Mhm.
It resulted in what am I going to do with my children.
Mhm.
And so those uh,
Was
the
that a
word survive
pivot?
the word survival comes to mind. So
Was
I
that
got
a
through
pivot?
that.
Kevin, was that a pivot for you in when you started opening up? Did it do a pivot for you in, we were talking about personal relationships, but did it do a pivot for you in where you were going and you could start seeing your future in a different way, and it brought you into maybe what you're doing today, or what that shift do with all of a sudden you're feeling some type of freedom, but also some pain, big pain, wanting to finally open up, and that exposure and the rawness of like really authentically being yourself and the things that you just shared. But what that pivot do for you once you unlocked that space? And the reason I'm asking this is because I think about, for our viewers, there's things that that they're hiding from, that they're not in that alignment, and they're working on that. But I want to hear how that pivot worked for you and how it transformed your life to where you are now at 75. Like, now that you can look back and see it, but how'd that shift you in the positive way and get you into where you are now through all that pain?
Okay. Well,
Did I
when
ask it
we
right?
yeah, you did. Sure.
Okay.
Is there a wrong way to ask it? I don't think so.
Well, just so you understand what the question is.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking of the word pivot. Um, pivot. Although I'm not an active sports person, I certainly relate to that concept of making a change, pivots, whether we do it personally or career-wise, relationship-wise, a change, an adjustment. And it could be a footstep or it could be a circle that goes around and around. But I guess at that point, when I was making that pivot, even though I was seeing a counselor, I wasn't at a point yet that I could talk to my then wife about it. But I did have acquaintances and friends that I knew were already had some friends who had come out before, or they were
Oh.
living with a gay identity,
Mm-hmm.
and some people just who I didn't even know were came into my life at about that same time.
Wow.
So I mean, old friends or people that revealed themselves to me, and I think that was part karma,
Mm-hmm.
part just hey, when you open yourself up to wanting these conversations, people do appear. People
Yeah.
come if you, and we could run away from those people because I could say, oh, I don't want to know any more about this.
Yeah.
But the pivot for me was to say, well, let's talk to them about that. And whether it was people I knew, uh, whatever, however we were equipped 20 years ago to go through blogs or websites, so much different than it is now. But to venture into those spaces to say, hey, I'm a I'm married, I'm a father, but um, I have this part of me that identifies as gay. What do I do with this? And there was support there. There were people I could talk
Wow.
to, either that I knew or people that I didn't know, and just found on in various chat. I don't think we call them that anymore. Prior to Zoom, we had chat rooms,
Yeah.
chat room spaces. So that was a pivot I took to say, this is pretty scary, but I'm going to bring up these questions with people, and I'm going to talk to them about how they're navigating this.
Yeah.
So when I think of people in my own work now, I mean, who would have thought when I was doing that in 20 years ago that I'd be taking up a position in a school system where
Yeah.
I was the LGBT advocate and advisor. Who would have thought that? I mean, so, but if I hadn't had those conversations, haven't done that pivot,
Yeah.
and just went back into my, I'll use the word closet, and stayed there, I wouldn't have had a lot of things that have happened to me in the 20 years since.
Yeah.
And some of those steps, some of those things that have happened, yeah, they've been painful, and but they've also, there's other things that have been so rewarding, and so I'm so grateful for. Um, so I think that idea, when we think of the opposite of pivot, there is an opposite.
Yeah.
I think one image that comes to mind is standing still, not moving, quivering and shaking,
Yeah.
uh, not taking a step. And I think for me, and I think this is probably like what a lot of your listeners would go through, when you're in that spot where you have a choice, and it is a choice to stand still or pivot. And I think that's where, for me, the pivot is what really worked for me. Yeah.
And I feel like we're getting close to the end here, and I really like this conversation because it serves so many people in you're going to be dealing with pain when you open up, but it's also going to take you in an area that you get to be authentic, be yourself. And in some ways that can be kind of ginger too. It's just like, wow, like this is kind of a lot of exposure of who you are, which in the past that was something that you were trying to figure out as you went along. And I find that this is what this show is about. This
Hmm. Hmm.
conversation is it's okay when you are feeling something that doesn't feel good, but you can see that it's something that feels good on another side because it feels right. You're finally speaking your voice. You're finally opening up to what the truth is that you've been muffling all along. And that confusion, I think about health also. That confusion can just be so disruptive in how you feel energy wise. Sounds like you've been doing great work all your life because you're like a navigator. You help people really envision and the steps that they're going and
Mhm,
that
mhm,
creative
mhm.
space. So I definitely see you as a navigator for with all the stuff you do. So I really appreciate what you were sharing here.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. And
So
that's the moniker I've chosen to use on in terms of grief, and that's what I use on social media. I call myself the grief navigator because there are so many resources out there, or resources that weren't there 20 years ago, certainly weren't there 30 or 40 years ago
right.
when my dad, or even longer than that, almost 80 years ago now, 90 years ago, when my family started a funeral home. That whole idea of grief navigation wasn't there. Where do you find these resources? And now, you being in the health field, or physical health, mental health, that's such a vital aspect of working through grief, is to find the resources, to go to the resources, and make ourselves part of those resources, so uh, we can understand what's happening with grief.
I love that you're talking more about your book and what your connection is about the grief. And if you look at every part of your life when there were those points where you became more aware of, like, I'm opening myself up to be more authentic. I mean, that kind of fits the grief
Hmm.
navigator. Like everything you do really tethers into that space because any kind of change is going, the reason why you're hiding it is you're like, I feel this pain, but I know that if I move forward, I'm still going to feel the pain, but it's new and I don't know where it's going to go. But to have those steps and understand that there is extra special care that you can do for yourself and the connection and how to help you move forward. We are talking about family, you're talking about, how you connect people with different things. So and that's kind of what your book is around. So how can they get your book and really understand about this grief navigation? They can grab your book, get the free
Sure,
resources and understanding of your experience.
sure. And the grief, as you mentioned earlier, the book is a memoir. So the memoir is the book has provided a launch pad for the work I'm doing now, as the grief navigator. And the book, Two Floors Above Grief, is a collection of stories about two families that lived above a funeral home. One of those families was mine. My mom, my dad, my two brothers, and I. And then in this apartment that was in the level below us, in an old Victorian house, was my aunt and uncle and their three daughters. So it was two families living in this very unique environment in an old Victorian house with a funeral home underneath.
Yeah.
So I think part of the thing that helps me recognize my experiences as being unique, as not a lot of kids are born into that environment. When I was born in 1950, I was brought to this house as a baby, and um, so from the time I was born, my dad had already established himself as a funeral director for 15, 20 years. But I didn't know any different
Yeah.
than being in an environment where people are celebrated, where people, and I didn't think of it probably as a kid in the regards to a celebration, but that's what my family provided for people, was a way to celebrate life. And so and the stories, those some of your listeners might be familiar with 6 Feet Under, or some of those shows that were on a while.
Mhm.
That show always showcased the family of the grieving as well. The book I have doesn't, focuses more on our families and how we lived our lives, and what we did as families. So it makes a lot of connections to family stories. It makes a lot of, for readers, and when I read the reviews, it's just people appreciate the family connections and how families got along. Not all families in a business situation get along.
Right. They
Uh,
don't have the understanding how to do that, but it sounds like that was
Ours did.
mhm, which is
Ours
a
did.
great book to be able to experience that, to be
Oh
able
yeah,
to
yeah.
display to people how it can happen. I know in my family, there was someone that just I felt like it was like I loved them so much, and I was figuring out like how can I create this relationship with them that is better that I don't feel sick when I'm around them. It just feels like they're having a difficult time, but somehow it's like in my space. I feel so toxic when I'm around them. But how do I, instead of just like fully just like oh and battle, how can we bring this together so that we can both see how we can manage this relationship? And so I'm always looking for that. I'm always looking, how can we create something that not everybody was raised in a very like how easy it is to get along, because those are skills. We're all
Mhm,
human.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so how do
mhm.
you not go down, the depths of, oh, he said that, she said that, and all that kind of stuff. You were around a very nurturing, how can we be cohesive in this business on the first floor, which
Right,
you talk
right.
about, to
Mhm.
second and third floor of those families being together. So we are out of time.
Great,
We
okay.
could talk forever. I enjoyed it
Yeah.
so much. I appreciate what you're about, my friend. And so we'll make sure that they get to KevinO'ConnorAuthor.com, and you can see how his name is spelled too. But we'll also have a link wherever you
Yeah,
guys
and that
do.
website will take them to that's easiest way to get to the purchase sites, and
Yeah.
2 floors above Grief, they can go to the online things like Amazon, but they can order it from their local bookstore and things too,
Yeah, 'cause
so.
I see on your website here, which is great, you probably get to connect with them more because 'cause they're giving you their name and their email and even a message, so that's great, because then they can get on your list, so
Mhm.
you get to talk to them more, which I love that.
Yeah, yeah, and I have a weekly newsletter that comes out, so once they get in there, there's a place to sign up for the weekly newsletter, and just, what I do usually on that is just whatever I'm doing with the book, or I'm traveling or going to fairs, or I'll let people know. I always usually have a feature in there about things I'm picking up on different websites about grief.
Yeah.
This issue that came out just a couple hours ago this week was I'm starting something where each week I will feature something that I'm reading, because reading provides the foundation for me for writing. And so I
Yeah.
want to clue the readers of my newsletter into things that I'm reading. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing too. So
I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you for coming on.
thanks, Rhonda.
Fun.
Appreciate it. You made it very comfortable, very easy. You're a great host. I appreciate it. And I've enjoyed this conversation and our prior ones as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate you too, my friend. So
Okay.
Fresh Talks Global Vision, I think we nailed it again. It's like I feel like if we just keep loving on people and we really lean in and discover all these wonderful people that we have around us, these conversations, it changes our life. I know it has for me. I feel like this is a mastermind. How can we level up, acknowledge where we are, and then keep leveling up? Because if I get to live to be 100 plus or whatever, I want to keep saying, here it, the latest thing I learned is. So these conversations to me are very meaningful. Thank you, Kevin, for being on.
Thank you for having me.
All
Okay.
right.
All
Love
right.
you, everybody. I love you. And let's keep hashtag speaker locking arms. Let's keep opening our voice, locking arms together, change this world. And mine is the stop the blaming and shaming. What is yours? What do you want to do? What's in your heart? Because I'd love for you to use that hashtag to support what I'm doing, but I will support what you're doing too, because we're collaborating together. And this earth does not work just us being alone and solo, but we really are partnering all the time. I love everybody. You have an insightful day, and thank you for stopping by. Namaste.